Hello there, everybody. Welcome to our special session of the RAS Step Up Your Safety series. As we are already getting ready to head towards the end of another school year, today we're going to step up instead our school smarts and talk about how to safely prepare your schools and your classrooms for that upcoming summer break. I'm Kelly Marshall. Thanks for joining me today. A couple of things as we get started. Everyone has entered on mute with both your phone and computer audio. If you do have any questions that come up as we talk through today, we will look at those at the end. You can simply enter those at any point in time using the Q&A function. Before we get started, I thought it might be fun, since we're talking about summer, to at least do one quick question for all of you, which should pop up on your screen. Certainly you do not have to share, but as we're getting ready to talk about some maybe not such fun things that come with summer prep, talking about if you have any fun things coming up, if you have any fun trips planned for the summer. Looks like everybody has gotten a chance to answer that. Another second here if you're trying to find those buttons. So it looks like a lot of you are well on your way. You already have something planned, or if not, hopefully this will be your good reminder to get your summer trips planned after we get through talking about how we get there. So a couple of things that we'll talk through today. Every year we see lots of injuries, unfortunately, that happen in our schools as a result of simply preparing and trying to get to summer. So of course, none of us really want to go into those months with those fun trips coming up that we have planned for relaxation and instead recovering from an injury or worrying about scheduling a surgery. Not only do we want everybody in your schools to be able to enjoy that downtime, but unfortunately, as I have to remind you, this can be a costly reminder for you down the road too. Workers' compensation, unfortunately, those claims tend to linger around. So if you do experience some of those end of the year injuries, those experiences will continue with you and impact your experience modifier, your workers' compensation premiums for years to come. So instead of spending those limited funds on injuries, let's talk about how we prevent some of those things from happening in the first place. We'll start with some of the most obvious items, which is getting those classrooms packed up and cleaned up, ready for the summer, and what safety practices we need to remember when we're doing so. We'll talk also about what's probably an unpopular opinion, some guidelines for safely participating, or spoiler alert, not participating in those fun end of the year activities that you may already have done or have planned and yet to come. And then finally, we'll talk about some of those other necessary evils that come with the end of the school year, which includes things like safety in some of the computer work yet to come, in that record keeping and reporting piece that we also unfortunately are required to wrap up with. So let's start with the most obvious, which is getting those classrooms packed up, cleaned up, prepared to move, and so forth as we head into summer. Every year we see lots of injuries that happen not only at the end of the school year, but throughout, when we have staff, teachers standing on things they shouldn't be standing on, and we experience those slip and fall injuries. Lots of serious injuries have occurred when people fall off of those stools, desks, chairs, and so on. Desks, especially student desks and chairs and tables and wheeled desk chairs, weren't meant for standing on. They're often not meant to hold the weight of an adult regardless, and we never really know what kind of condition lots of those classroom items may be in by the end of the year anyway. They can tip over very easily. So instead, it's important to remind staff to be using the right items to stand on safely when they need to reach maybe some of those higher, hard to reach locations in the classroom or throughout the school. It's important to know where your ladders and step ladders are kept. Oftentimes, these are those items that are in a janitorial or a custodian's closet somewhere, but they aren't necessarily being used on a daily basis. So sometimes towards the end of the school year, What you may want to think about doing is relocating those commonly shared items and safety items to a spot where teachers and staff can readily see them and be reminded that they should be using them, but also access them. So maybe a spot in a common shared space or in a hallway where they can get to those step ladders when they need to use them, as opposed to those being held somewhere in a closet, out of sight, out of mind. Next item, as we pack up those classrooms, is talking about how we do so safely. So sometimes this means that we are moving classrooms entirely. We may have an overhaul being done in that particular classroom during the summer, where we have to move all of the desks, chairs, furniture, and so forth. And so this would be something that if you do have the opportunity before students are gone for the summer, if those are items that you could safely recruit some students to move before they head home for the summer, that might be a really good use of your time and energies, or rather their time and energies. If it is something that falls to staff and teachers, make sure that we aren't trying to carry too many things at once. I'm certainly guilty of this when I'm carrying in groceries from the car, for example, but oftentimes the better choice is to make several trips with smaller loads as opposed to one trip with an awkward or too heavy load. So we should never be pushing, pulling, carrying too many things at once. Might need to be broken up into a couple of different loads. It's also helpful to schedule or find some time when you do have some of those larger things to move, with desks, cabinets, bookshelves, furniture, for example, not only to maybe split that up with another classroom teacher or another staff that can help with moving and manipulating that load, but also from that equipment moving perspective. We'll show some examples here in just a moment of some items that you may also want to consider putting in a shared location to be used for moving some of those things. So things like carts and dollies, different furniture slides or moving aids can be really helpful. And again, if those are in a spot where people can see them and be reminded to use them, that will make moving some of these larger items much safer. In the rest of that piece of the bigger puzzle and what we're talking about with putting those, some of heavy tasks, some of the heavy lifting and moving, that can also easily be split up with some of those more sedentary tasks that we'll talk about here in just a few minutes. So it's a good idea to split up doing all of the heavy work at once and mix that in with maybe some rest breaks or some of the paperwork and office types of tasks as well. We'll talk a little bit about some body position considerations in the next couple of slides. One of those recommendations is to use the power position, and that's what this looks like. The power position is designed to alleviate some of that stress and injury that can be caused when we're bending incorrectly. The power position looks like this. It's a wide stance, a wide base of support. It's having your chin up. It's keeping kind of that soft bend in the knees rather than bending over from the low back. And it's bending at your hips and keeping that butt out. The power position really results in extra strength and power and prevents that low back stress and strain. This slide gives a couple of examples of some of those lifting and moving devices that we talked about too. Helps just eliminate the bulk of lifting and strain on the body with some of those bigger items. So things like carts, the desk movers that we talked about, furniture dollies, chair movers where you stack those chairs up and move them all at once, or a two-wheeled dolly. So those are some examples of things you may want to have in that area where staff can easily access them so that they can be thinking about using those things as opposed to doing all of that hard work themselves. The next cause of injury to be concerned about is slips, trips, and falls. So not only do we experience falling off of things that we shouldn't be standing on, but even though we're getting ready to head into summer, it's probably not quite the right time for staff to switch over to that sandals and flip-flop footwear quite yet. Still a good idea to make sure that you have people wearing closed-toe shoes with good support, with a good tread, a good sole, and slip-resistant sole when they're organizing and moving and cleaning classrooms. Additionally, I know we've talked a little bit about having some commonly used items, maybe in an easily accessed area like a hallway, for example. But do be mindful of keeping those walkways continued to be clear. So if we do have some areas where you have commonly used items or things that people may be sharing, it's important to make sure that those don't become trip hazards either. That as you're moving, especially classrooms and bigger pieces of equipment, there's still a clear walkway for people to make their way through as they're moving and cleaning those things. The next fun and maybe not so fun topic here are some of those end of the year activities. Some of you may be well immersed in these things already, and if not, we may have the opportunity to talk about a few of those too. So again, I have one more quick question before we talk about active participation. And that is really about what you do if you do any end of the year activities. So you should see another one pop up on your screen here, asking if your school does any kind of a staff participation activity at the end of the school year. And if you're already feeling potentially shamed, you certainly don't have to answer this question. I see a few of you are maybe rethinking your answer to this question, and that's good. We're split pretty much 50-50, as you can see. So half of you may have something planned, may have already done some sort of an end of the year fun activity. The others of you don't want to share that right now, or maybe don't do something like this. So let's talk a little bit about active participation. This could be anything that involves a staff or team building type of activity, or it could be something more like a student versus teacher challenge, end of the year volleyball or basketball game, for example. Could also include things like assemblies or pep rallies, your field day activities, field trips, even as simple as the everyday recess activities and the games and sports that you may have happening. The recommendation here is truly that teachers and staff should be avoiding actively participating in those student sports or games or activities. Supervision should be the primary role here. Participating with students, unfortunately, has resulted in some very significant and costly work comp injuries, things like concussions, torn tendons, pulled muscles, and even broken bones. So of course, those are never fun things that we want to think about going into summer, worrying about and spending time recovering from. The focus should really be on assessing student skills and being kind of that cheerleader or coach from the sidelines versus the active participant that may have been, the standout soccer player in a former career life. But really the job is to be that coach and to assess what students are doing, encourage them, instruct them, and supervise what they're doing. If this isn't something that you've thought about, it might be worth considering whether it's in advance of something that you have planned for the next month or so of school, or even as you look at going back to school in the fall. Staff injury risk should still be considered when you're thinking about doing some of these planning events. If you knew that a student versus staff volleyball game, for example, would result in 3 or so of your staff members being injured and tens, if not more, thousands of dollars worth of work comp related injuries, medical bills, and so on, would that be worth it to you? Would the pros outweigh the cons? And is it truly something that's appropriate or necessary for them to be doing? It's important just to think through these things because oftentimes we overlook the exposures or the risks of having staff participate in some of these things until it's too late, and then we're faced with some of those work-related injuries that we have to spend time recovering from. So how do you help prevent those participation injuries? Like I said, it might be a good time to reconsider, even if it's something that you've done for years, that student versus staff basketball game, for example. Maybe now's a good time to think about what your best practices are, what your traditions are, what your procedures around those things might be. And could it be replaced with something less physical? So for example, Could you look at including some sort of a trivia or a word game, an escape room or bingo, charades, or a scavenger hunt that isn't, hopefully, quite as physically active? When truly active participation is something that you decide you're willing to risk or that you can't avoid, at the very least, make sure that you're still considering some of the things we've already talked about. Things like appropriate footwear for the activity, using good body mechanics, and then allowing breaks whenever that's possible as well. Above all else, don't put your school budgets into those work comp premiums as a result of something that was designed to be fun for everyone. Instead, let's focus on how we can prevent some of those things from happening in the first place. Last but not least, again, that unnecessary evil of the end of the year, the records, the reports, entering grades, perhaps planning for next school year, and some of those additional risks that maybe we just need to take a minute to think about as well. So above all, it's important, regardless of the type of task, to alternate some of those different types of duties. When you can, you don't want to spend a full day at just your computer, just like you don't want to spend a full day moving classrooms. So if you can alternate some of those physical and more sedentary tasks, that will always be a safer option for you and for your staff. It's a busy time for everybody, so it's important to prioritize and encourage staff to prioritize their own self-care, to get plenty of rest, to make sure they're taking those breaks when they need them. It hopefully is a good time to start getting outside, maybe take a quick walk and get up from your desk or change positions from what you're doing. Of course, then, if it is getting warm out and we have some of those physically demanding tasks, might need to also start thinking about heat stress and drinking plenty of water and taking breaks in a cool area. Encourage folks to take those breaks, to be mindful of the positions that they're putting their bodies in. And of course, whether it's physical or it's truly just kind of that emotional support, to ask for help when they need it. So a quick wrap up of the things we discussed: lifting and moving classroom items safely, avoiding active participation in some of those really fun games and activities that come at the end of the year, and prioritizing rest, self-care, and good ergonomics. Before you go and we take a peek if there are any questions here, just a couple of things for you. I would look forward to seeing you in May when we will start to talk even more about that summer months ahead and shift into heat stress awareness. If you haven't already, for you specifically, watch for a special series we're working on to prepare already for the return to school in the fall. As we're talking about going into summer, we're already ready to start talking about going back in the fall. For the week of July 28th, we'll be hosting a back to school boot camp. This is new for us this year. We'll feature educational sessions for everyone from business managers to custodians, teachers, food service, and more. We want to help make sure you get your school year kicked off safely and smoothly. So keep an eye on your inbox. That registration information will be coming your way next month. In addition, you'll get a quick survey when we get done with the webinar here today. It's just a couple of questions, but really helps us better understand what things are of interest to you that you might be looking for in future webinar events and what best fits your time and attention for getting valuable safety information. A recording to this webinar will be sent out along with a couple of resources with some of the items we talked about that you can post and share for your students, your staff, your teachers, to make sure that they're keeping these things top of mind as they start to physically prepare classrooms for those summer months. So before I take a quick look at any questions or any comments you all have, if you need to hop off, I would say thank you for joining today, and we hope to see you again very soon. Take one quick look here at any questions. There is one question about physical active participation. So what's wrong with active participation in an activity? And certainly this is where you have to talk about if the risks outweigh the rewards or vice versa. So certainly there is that team building aspect and the camaraderie benefits of a staff building activity. Certainly with common sense, an excellent point that cannot always be underscored or under considered, but those can be done safely and well. It's a matter of, again, kind of outweighing the pros and cons here. So we do see very costly injuries that require a lot of time, attention, and follow-up based on things, unfortunately, when we put staff who maybe aren't quite as physically fit as they used to be into those positions where all of a sudden they're playing a very physically demanding volleyball game against students who are, 15 years old and in their physical prime. And we see staff come away with some pretty significant and costly injuries because maybe they haven't been quite as physically fit as those students are at the time. So it can be done. It's really just a matter of outweighing the pros of the situation versus the cons. And I would argue there are lots of options as well for some less physically demanding activities that can still be a lot of fun and provide that team building experience. And to clarify, yes, staff versus students, definitely the more risky of those behaviors. Staff only could be a different story, especially if you're not physically pitting them against one another in some sort of a competitive environment. So certainly something to consider, and really just to think about if you have had those experiences, it might be worth reconsidering, again, that annual staff versus students basketball game and whether or not it's still providing the same outcomes that you were hoping for. Thanks everybody once again for joining, and hope to see you again next month.